An arc fault circuit interrupter, or AFCI, is a circuit breaker that breaks the circuit when it detects the electric arcs that are a signature of faulty wiring. AFCIs are required on bedroom circuits to protect against fire hazards. A perplexing electrical problem is when the AFCI breaker trips intermittently. Here are several potential causes and some recommended troubleshooting steps. Firstly, consider the garage door openers. It is possible intermittent voltage spikes or disturbances caused by the opener's motors could be triggering the AFCI, even if the owner claims the breaker does not trip during operation. Check the condition of the openers and their wiring. Inspect for any loose connections. Secondly, sensitive appliances may be the cause. AFCIs can be tripped by electronic devices that generate high-frequency noise. Examples include computers, televisions, or dimmer switches. Identify any appliances or devices that may be causing the issue by isolating them on a different circuit. To do this, you could try unplugging these devices one by one to see if the tripping stops. Thirdly, investigate potential mismatched neutrals. It is possible that one or more neutrals are accidentally tied to the ground, despite not finding an obvious neutral connection issue. Use a multimeter to check for any parallel neutral ground connections on all circuits in the unit. A multimeter can help identify unintentional connections between the neutral and ground. Set your multimeter to measure resistance in ohms. Turn off the power to the circuit at the main breaker. Disconnect the neutral wire from the neutral bar in the electrical panel. Disconnect the ground wire from the ground bar in the electrical panel. Place one probe of the multimeter on the disconnected neutral wire and the other probe on the disconnected ground wire. A reading of 0 ohms or very close to 0 ohms indicates a direct connection between the neutral and ground. A high resistance reading indicates no connection. Repeat this test for all circuits in the unit to identify any circuits with a neutral ground connection. Fourthly, consider a faulty AFCI breaker. The AFCI breaker itself could be faulty, although this is less likely. Consider replacing the breaker with a new one of the same type and rating. Make sure the new breaker is UL listed and specifically designed for AFCI protection. Before replacing the breaker, double-check that the wiring connections to the breaker are tight and secure. Loose connections can sometimes cause nuisance tripping. Fifthly, carefully inspect for signs of arcing or leakage. Look for any signs of arcing or leakage on wires, terminals, or electrical components within the unit. Check for any damaged insulation, loose wiring, or overheating. Look for signs of discoloration, burning, or melting on wires, connections, and devices. Use a flashlight to carefully inspect hard-to-reach areas. If you see any signs of arcing, leakage, or damage, replace the affected components and repair any wiring issues. Now let's look at troubleshooting steps. Firstly, isolate the problem. Divide the bedroom circuits into smaller sections. Test each section separately to narrow down the source of the tripping. This can be done by selectively disconnecting parts of the circuit. To isolate the problem effectively, follow these steps. Turn off the AFCI breaker that is tripping. Unplug all appliances and devices connected to the affected bedroom circuits. Turn the AFCI breaker back on. If the breaker does not trip, the problem is likely with one of the appliances or devices that you unplugged. Plug in each appliance and device one at a time, waiting a few hours or days between each plug-in. If the breaker trips after plugging in a specific appliance or device, that appliance or device is likely the cause of the problem. If the breaker continues to trip even with all appliances and devices unplugged, the problem is likely with the wiring or the AFCI breaker itself. In this case, you will need to further isolate the problem by dividing the circuit into smaller sections. Turn off the AFCI breaker again. At the first electrical box in the circuit, disconnect the wiring leading to the rest of the circuit. Turn the AFCI breaker back on. If the breaker does not trip, the problem is in the section of the circuit that you disconnected. If the breaker still trips, the problem is in the section of the circuit that is still connected. Repeat this process, dividing the circuit into smaller and smaller sections until you isolate the problem. Secondly, temporarily bypass the AFCI. Bypassing the AFCI breaker on the affected circuit can be a temporary measure to see if the tripping stops. This will help isolate the issue to the circuit itself or downstream devices. I must emphasize that bypassing an AFCI breaker is only for diagnostic purposes and should not be a permanent solution. AFCIs provide important protection against electrical fires. Bypassing the AFCI removes this protection and increases the risk of fire. If you choose to temporarily bypass the AFCI, follow these steps very carefully. Turn off the AFCI breaker. Remove the AFCI breaker from the electrical panel. Connect the wires that were connected to the AFCI breaker directly to each other. This will bypass the AFCI breaker. Turn the main breaker back on. Monitor the circuit for any signs of problems, such as overheating, arcing, or smoking. If you see any of these signs, turn off the breaker immediately and call a qualified electrician. If the breaker does not trip after bypassing the AFCI, the problem is likely with the AFCI breaker itself. If the breaker continues to trip even with the AFCI bypassed, the problem is likely with the wiring or devices in the circuit. Once you have identified the source of the problem, you must correct it immediately and reinstall the AFCI breaker. Thirdly, consider monitoring. Use a voltage or current meter to monitor the circuit for any voltage fluctuations, spikes, or excessive current draw. A voltage meter can detect voltage fluctuations or spikes that may be triggering the AFCI breaker. Connect the voltage meter to the circuit and monitor the voltage over a period of time. Look for any sudden increases or decreases in voltage. A current meter can detect excessive current draw that may be overloading the circuit and causing the AFCI breaker to trip. Connect the current meter to the circuit and monitor the current over a period of time. Look for any current draw that exceeds the rating of the AFCI breaker or the wiring on the circuit. Monitoring the voltage and current can help you identify problems that may not be obvious through visual inspection. However, it is important to use the meters correctly and safely. If you are not comfortable using electrical meters, consult a qualified electrician. If the issue persists after following these troubleshooting steps, it is advisable to contact a licensed electrician for further diagnosis and repairs. Electrical work can be dangerous, and a professional electrician has the knowledge and experience to safely and effectively resolve complex electrical problems.